I want to spend some time today to ask all of you a very important question that I think we need to ask regarding all of our key religious figures. This is a question that really needs answering. And today I will be touching on Islam. That question being, was Muhammad a false prophet? Now, I want to make things very clear. I want this to be a respectful presentation, and I know that this is inherently coming off as an attack, but I don't want it to be like that. So that being said, there are some parameters that I want to put in place. First and foremost, we will only be using core Islamic doctrine in this presentation. So that's only from the Quran itself and from the Hadith. So the things that I will be reading here are things that you could hear in a mosque recited by an imam. So again, only core Islamic doctrine. That means no outside sources. So nothing written by Christians, nothing written by Buddhists or atheists, or any other religion, not even things written by Muslims who did not have a part in writing the Quran or the Hadith. So let's just jump into it. If we're going to deal with this question, we should first see what the Quran has to say about the idea if Muhammad was a false prophet. So we go here to Quran 69, 44 through 46. And if he, Muhammad, had forged a false saying concerning us, we surely should have seized him by his right hand or with power and might, and then certainly should have cut off his life artery or his aorta. So for those of you who don't know, the aorta is the large artery that comes out of the left ventricle of the heart. Islamic sources also sometimes call it the life artery, as seen on screen. So basically, this is a revelation from Muhammad, coming from Allah, where he basically says, if I am making anything up, if I am false, or if I am making up any sayings concerning Allah, he will seize me with power, and he will kill me by cutting off my aorta. Now, this is very important. This is a Meccan surah, which means that this was preached by Muhammad after they conquered Mecca. So Muhammad would be saying this to his followers for years, all the way up until the time of his death. Now, this is from the Halala Khan translation of the Quran, but the verse is relatively the same in all other accepted English translations of the Quran. So for example, the Dawood translation, the Shakir, and also the Pickthall. Now, I will let you guys know I will be moving through this presentation, not necessarily reading everything, and I know that there's a lot of text. So if any of you want this presentation, just shoot something in the chat, and I'll try and get this to you after I'm done presenting. But so yeah, as you can kind of see, if you stop to read this on your own, they're all fairly similar. Really no major differences. So now that we know what Allah would do if Muhammad was a false prophet, let's look at how Muhammad actually died. So, does anybody know what this is, this building? And unmute your mic if you have an idea.
That is a mosque in Medina that houses Muhammad's body, I believe.
Yes, you are correct. But more specifically, it is the Green Dome, or in Arabic, Al-Kaaba al-Kidra. And it is built over the grave of Muhammad. And it is in the Mosque of the Prophet, or Al-Masjid an-Nawawi. And it is in Medina, Arabia. Now, this may be where Muhammad died, in Medina, but it is not where the story of Muhammad's death actually started. The story of Muhammad's death actually started here in the city of Khaybar. specifically at the Battle of Khaybar in the year 628 AD. Muhammad and his soldiers set their sight on the city of Khaybar, which is on the edge of Arabia. It was a primarily Jewish city, but it had large ethnic and religious minorities of Christians, pagans, and even fellow Muslims. But Muhammad and his soldiers, when they attacked, they successfully defeated the Jewish defenders. Now, after the battle, a while later, Muhammad was approached by a Jewish woman who was from Khaybar, who offered to cook him and his soldiers a meal. He agreed, and we hear the story here in this next slide. But it turns out that the woman actually poisoned the food that was given to Muhammad. We hear in Sahih Muslim 54:30, a Jewess came to Allah's messenger with poisoned mutton, and he took of what had been brought to him. When the effects of the poison were felt by him, he called for her and asked her about that, whereupon she said, I had determined to kill you. Thereupon he said, Allah will never give you the power to do it. And then in Sahih al-Bukhari 26:17, a Jewess brought a poisoned cooked sheep for the Prophet, who ate from it. She was brought to the Prophet and was asked, shall we kill her? He said, no. Anas added, I continued to see the effect of the poison on the palate of the mouth of Allah's messenger. So we see here that this woman brought Muhammad and his men poisoned food. But why did she do this? We actually learn this in this next reading from the Hadith. It says here in Ibn Asad, page 252, the Apostle of Allah sent for Zainab bint al-Harith and said to her, what induced you to do what you have done? She replied, you have done to my people what you have done. You have killed my father, my uncle, and my husband. So I said to myself, if you are a prophet, the foreleg will inform you. And others have said, if you are a king, we will get rid of you. Frankly, when I read this, I see a lot of faith on Zainab's part. Even after her father, her uncle, and her husband were killed by Muhammad and his soldiers, she was still open to the possibility that he could be a prophet from God. So she decided, I will give him a little test. I'm going to poison this food. And if he really is a prophet from God, God or the food will inform him and he won't die from the poison. But if he's a king, he will eat the poison and he will die. There is a more complete version of the story in this next reading, which goes, it's in Sunan Abu Dawud 4498. Show a Jewess presented him at Khaybar with a roasted sheep which she had poisoned. The Apostle of Allah ate of it, and the people also ate. He then said, take away your hands from the food, for it has informed me that it is poisoned. Bishr ibn al-Bara ibn Murur al-Ansari died. So he, the Prophet, sent for the Jewess and said to her, what motivated you to do the work you have done? She said, if you were a prophet, it would not harm you. But if you were a king, I should rid the people of you. The Apostle of Allah then ordered regarding her, and she was killed. He then said about the pain of which he died, I continued to feel the pain from the morsel which I had eaten at Khaybar. This is the time when it has cut off my aorta. It's interesting that he says aorta. That's very specific for this. If we remember back to Quran 69:44-46, this is exactly how he said Allah would kill him if he had made up false sayings or if he was a false prophet. But maybe this is just here. We'll get back to the aorta question later. There is one character in this, Bishr, who is a very important person, and we get to hear more about him and a little bit about his story in this next reading. It says in Ibn Asad, page 252 through 253, the apostle of Allah took the foreleg, a piece of which he put into his mouth. Bishr ibn al-Bara took another bone and put it into his mouth. When the apostle of Allah ate one morsel of it, Bishr ate his, and other people also ate from it. Then the apostle of Allah said, "Hold back your hands, because this foreleg has informed me that it is poisoned." Thereupon Bishr said, "By him who hath made you great, I discovered it from the morsel I took. Nothing prevented me from spitting it out, but the idea that I did not like to make your food unrelishing. When you had eaten what was in your mouth, I did not like to save my life after yours. And I also thought you would not have eaten it if there was something wrong." Bishr did not rise from his seat, but his color changed to that of talcin, which is a green cloth. So Bishr ibn al-Bara knew it was poisoned, but he ate it anyways out of loyalty to Muhammad. So he knew it was poisoned, but Muhammad needed a revelation to see that it was poisoned. He couldn't just taste it. But that's that. Bishr will actually come up again in the very end, but for now, we will move on to the final days of Muhammad. Muhammad's condition grew progressively worse after Khaybar, and he eventually died roughly 4 years later in the year 632 AD in Medina. So that's why some sources will say that, oh, he died of natural causes, or he died of something later. But the hadith actually speaks to the opposite. But here in these two readings, we get to see how awful it must have been for Muhammad. In Sahih al-Bukhari 2588, Aisha said, "When the Prophet became sick and his condition became serious, he requested his wives to allow him to be treated in my house, and they allowed him. He came out leaning on two men while his feet were dragging on the ground." And then in Sunan ibn Majah 1622, Aisha said, "I never saw anyone suffer more pain than the messenger of Allah." Now, remember how I said we would get back to the whole idea of the aorta? It did not go away, and we see it here again, not once, but twice. In Sahih al-Bukhari 4428, the Prophet, in his ailment in which he died, used to say, "O Aisha, I still feel the pain caused by the food I ate at Khaybar, and at this time I feel as if my aorta is being cut by that poison." And then in At-Tamri 124, the messenger of God said during the illness from which he died, the mother of Bishr bin al-Bara had come in to visit him. Bishr, at this very moment I feel my aorta being severed because of the food I ate with your son at Khaybar." So Muhammad, again, doesn't just mention this once, but he mentions it twice to his wife and then to also the mother of his loyal soldier, Bishr. This is like someone saying, it's like some televangelist or something saying, if what I'm saying does not come directly from God, may he strike me dead with lightning right now. And the lightning doesn't strike. But the lightning does strike later in his life. So still, Muhammad dies by the exact way that he said he would in the Quran if he made up false sayings or if he was false himself. So given the evidence, I only see two options. The first is that Muslims must reread their sources, and they must go back in and determine where things contradict or where issues arise between sources that are, again, core Islamic doctrine, the Quran and the Hadiths. Or the second option is that Muhammad is in fact a false prophet. But again, I ask the question back to you. Given the evidence, do you think that Muhammad was a false prophet? And now that's it. So does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Mhm.
So do Muslims have like a counter argument for this? Like, since it's in their scriptures, do they have, I don't know, like a way around it?
I tried to look for some, but honestly, I really couldn't find any that dealt with all of the issues. Like, I would hear some saying that no, he actually didn't die because of the poison at Khaybar, because he died 4 years later, or people claiming that it was some other issue, or that he didn't fully know what he was saying. He didn't really mean that his aorta was cut. He just felt pain. But those are really the only things that I could hear trying to explain that. It doesn't deal with all of the issues.
All right, thank you.
Jacob, excellent presentation. As one that doesn't know Islam very much, you cited some sources. One was the Quran. The other one you said was the Hadith. Could you elaborate on what that is? Is that additional holy Muslim?
Okay. Yeah, I should have said specifically what it all was at the beginning, but so basically, for those of you who don't know, the Quran is the word of Allah as revealed by Muhammad, and then the Hadith are a collection of chapters or surahs that were written by people who lived with Muhammad, who wrote them after his death. So it's basically, the Quran is the revelation from Muhammad, and the Hadith are the writings about Muhammad's life. So the best way to understand the Quran and to understand what Muhammad is saying and where he's coming from is to read the Hadith, so you can get the life and the culture of Islam. So they go hand in hand, and they're both core Islamic doctrine.
Interesting. How thick is the Hadith? Am I
The
saying that right?
Hadith, it's with an H, Hadith.
Hadith.
Okay.
Okay.
It's pretty thick. There are a bunch of, it's a collection of a bunch of different authors and a bunch of different writings. It's the best way that I can kind of describe it is like almost like the Gospels, like written by people talking about Jesus. But yeah, it's fairly thick. There's a lot there.
Has this been in a way canonized by the Muslims?
Like all the verses presented here?
No, the Hadiths.
Yes. Well, not all of the Hadiths, but the ones that I cited are all, yes, core Islamic doctrine.
And I think a good analogy for the Hadith, if you don't mind me adding, would be, it's like the Quran is for Sunni Muslims specifically. Say the Quran is like the scriptures, and the Hadith is like infallible Catholic tradition. The Quran gets interpreted in light of that Hadith. Now, with Shia Muslims, it's a little bit different because they don't believe anything Aisha has to say, and a lot of the Hadith come from Aisha, so they discount a lot of what Sunnis hold to. But that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, or like the Talmud with the Old Testament and Jewish people, they interpret the Talmud, they interpret the Torah in light of Talmudic law.
Yeah. So, any other questions? And yeah, you are correct. That's.
I'm wondering if at the time, putting myself in the shoes of a Muslim, if at the time one could say, getting my aorta severed is like saying, I don't know, I'm having a heart, I'm having a heart attack, or some sort of generic kind of colloquialism in a way.
That could be the case, but again, they specifically knew what the aorta was. They knew that it was the large vein that came from the left ventricle. They knew specifically what it was, and they considered it the life artery which spread to the entire body. So it is very specific. It would be like someone saying today, like, I don't know. It's very specific. So it's possible that could be a thing, but I couldn't find any cultural connections like, oh, it just means I have chest pain. But it could be, but again, it's very specific.
Hey, Jacob, you think if it is a cultural idiomatic expression, don't you think that even if that is the case, that the Quran is using that same idiomatic expression and is therefore still corresponding to what happened to Muhammad?
Exactly. I was going to say that, because even if someone today were to say that, like, may I get a heart attack if I'm incorrect, and then they still get a heart attack and die, it might not be the exact type of heart attack that they were thinking or different type of chest pain, but it still happened.
Jacob, could you
Yeah.
clarify exactly what Mohammed did to cause him to get his aorta cut? Like, what did he say that was like incorrect?
It was the poison itself. He felt like the poison food that he ate at Khaybar was what severed his aorta. That's specifically what he believes.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't necessarily because he said something false. It was just he thought that the poison itself.
He didn't necessarily believe that he said anything false, because of course he believed that everything he said was true. But he is the one who specifically said that the poison had severed his aorta.
Okay.
I have a question. How did you go about researching this? Like, if I were to go look into this some more, like you did, how would I go do that?
Well, I honestly, first I looked up just the simple question, was Muhammad a false prophet? And I also looked up, well, actually, no, that's not what I looked up first. What I looked up first is, how did Muhammad die? And then I learned about Khaybar and how he was poisoned by a Jewish woman in Khaybar, and then how he actually eventually died later. But then I found it very interesting. And then as I looked that up, I found some sources and some articles saying that this actually could put into question his prophethood. And then I saw articles written by various Christians, and there's even a good video that uses a lot of the same sources of mine. It's by this guy named David Wood. He is an apologist. He's a little harsh in the way he comes off, and he's very satirical and very attacking, but that's his style. But you can research these articles online or try and watch things on YouTube. But yeah, it's out there. You just search those questions.
Do Muslims consider everything Muhammad said to be infallible, or just the Quran and his messages through that?
From what I've kind of read, they see that everything revealed in the Quran is not just the word of Muhammad, it's the word of Allah. And if anything contradicts, they will tend to go with what comes later as to be core, because, for example, the number of how many wives you can have actually changes. But this was not just something that was revealed early. This was something that he said over and over and over again. So if in this context, nothing conflicts with that statement of what would happen if he was a false prophet.
And may I interject one last time? I promise this will be my last interruption.
Oh, no, it's fine.
With the Hadith, you have, which contain the sayings of Muhammad, you sort of have a hierarchy. And different Muslim sects divide differently. And so the Sunnis will often go, you have Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim up here. Those are like the Sahih hadith, the clear hadith that you always want to go to. And then you have sort of a degradation of quality, with Ibn Asaq all the way down here, with Sunan Abu Dawud kind of in the middle over here, with some good, some bad, right? But even the Sunnis, especially Western Sunnis, they discount a lot of what Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari say, because it portrays Muhammad as a warlord, whereas the more conservative Middle Eastern Muslims will basically reject the peaceful sayings of Muhammad in the Hadith and only follow through the warlord sections of the Hadith. And so do the Muslims take everything Muhammad said at face value? Well, not really, because it's kind of impossible. Because the Hadith are a hopelessly contradictory body of documents and literature. And so it's arbitrary either way.
That's true. That's true. But through the things presented, there was a vast array, but yes, totally.
Okay, I have one more question. Is this seen as like a common like problem within like Muslim groups, or like do they talk about this often, or is it like insignificant? I'm just wondering like why I've never heard of this before when seems like Islam's so big. So
well, frankly, from what I've heard, it's one of those issues that isn't really talked about. Like another issue like this is the perfect preservation of the Quran. Muslims will say that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, but yet there are a lot of different translations of the Arabic Quran, which is the original translation, that contradict each other. So Muslims won't really talk about this that often, and their imams won't really bring it up. But in some of the higher circles of Islam, yes, it will be talked about.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm wondering, just following up on that, in a debate situation, how would a Muslim respond to the verses that you presented?
Honestly, I don't really know, because I've never really brought this up to a Muslim, but I would imagine that they would say something like what Jack said about like, oh, well, maybe we don't take all of that as exact word, and or something like, oh, well, maybe that just means chest pain. But that's really the only thing that I could think could be a major response. But I honestly don't really know.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, one more thing. Okay, so how do we like apply this? So like I feel like maybe it's not a very good idea to just go up to a Muslim friend and just bring it up. So like how would you suggest that we would like understand it but also use it somehow?
Yeah, definitely don't just go up to a Muslim and say, by the way, your prophet is false, or something like that. But I would not open again with anything like this. But it's definitely something that I think we should keep in our tool belt and keep these Quran verses, and the Hadith as well. But all of this stuff, remember it. And if a conversation ever leads towards Muhammad, or like if a Muslim friend asks, well, why don't you as Christians accept Muhammad as a prophet? We accept Jesus as a prophet. Then you can go into a discussion where I would first start with, even though I didn't say anything about this, I would talk about the difference between the Christian and the Muslim view of Jesus Christ. And then I would explain some of those differences. And then if the conversation continues, then lovingly maybe bridge into the prophethood of Muhammad. And you can talk about from both Christian ideals, from like what the Bible says about who a false prophet would be, and then maybe even touch on some of these things presented here about the Islamic view, and just try and bridge that gap kind of nicely.